This is Ben Faber, a farm advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, just north of Los Angeles. And we'll be talking about efficient nutrient management with special emphasis on nitrogen management. And here's a really clear example of the citrus leaf on the left is adequate nitrogen. The one on the right is yellow, and this is very typical of a poor nitrogen managed orchard. So we're going to be applying what's called the 4R principle: the right rate, the right time, the right place, the right source. So right rate means matching the demand by the crop with the supply, the application. The right time, putting it on when the plant needs it, when you're getting optimum uptake. The right place, making sure it's going into where the active root zone is. And the right source, finding out what the optimum fertilizer source type is for the crop that's being grown. So applying the right rate. So this is basically looking, what is the demand and supplying that demand. This demand is coming from what's in the soil, what's being released by the soil from organic matter, what's being applied through irrigation water, and what we apply through fertilizer. So one of the things to remember along the coast is we have primarily water that's sourced from wells, and this water often has nitrogen as one of the components of the salts that are in that water. So when you are applying nitrogen in excess of the tree needs, basically the efficiency goes down. But you often end up, what my major professor once said was, you're just creating hay that you have to prune out. A lot of nitrogen leads to excessive vegetative growth. Plus, when you're applying an excessive demand, it ends up in groundwater and surface waters and leads to pollution. So you have to look at what the calculated demand is. Okay, what is going into the roots, into the branches, into the leaves, into the fruit. For the case of trees, the best estimate for the amount applied is through leaf analysis. Leaf analysis tells you an integration of where the various sources of nitrogen are coming from, other nutrients are coming from. Are they coming from water or fertilizer from the soil? But the leaf analysis integrates everything, the fruit load and weather. Whereas with annuals, it's better to use actual soil nitrogen to estimate the crop water demand. So you look at how the soil nitrogen is changing and then apply fertilizer to raise or lower that to meet the needs of the tree or the annual plant, whether it's a lettuce or a strawberry. So in the case of citrus, we are looking at primarily the demand on nitrogen in the crop that's harvested, as well as that which is in the perennial tissue. So we can actually look at the total crop load that's removed, 20,000 or 30,000 pounds of citrus, and estimate that the crop load is 25 pounds of nitrogen per ton, and get an estimate of actual requirement just from the load of fruit that's coming off the tree. So in the case of citrus, we're looking at the end root removed in the crop, and then what might be needed for tree maintenance, the part that's going into the leaves and the branches, and we can come up with how much fertilizer to apply. So that'll lead us to what we call the nitrogen use efficiency, when we are applying the amount of nitrogen that is required versus that which is applied. So, no system is completely efficient. You put on nutrients by way of water, and that's released from soil, or that which we apply from fertilizer, and not all of that is going to go into the tree. There's going to be some losses. So efficiency is always going to be somewhat less than 100%. But the optimum efficiency is going to come with applying it at the right rate, right time, right place, and using the right source of nutrient. So looking at nitrogen removal rates, you can get those from a publication that's available at the CDFA website. So this has a listing of the removal rates for lettuce, for avocados, for citrus, for broccoli, for alfalfa. So you can get an estimate of how much is being removed. And if you mimic that amount with that which is applied, then you can get a very high nitrogen use efficiency, and you can apply closer to what the plant needs. So here's an example. This is a value that came from lemons out of that CDFA study. So it's 2.5 pounds of nitrogen per ton. So, and there's about 20 to 25 pounds that goes in the perennial tissue. So our target would be something on the order of about 75% of that 22,000 pounds that's required. And this would mean that we'd be putting on about 70 pounds of nitrogen if we put this into our estimate formula. Now, if you have a lower estimate of efficiency, you have a lower yield or a higher yield, you might have to change this value. Okay, right supply for annual crops is best done with soil nitrogen tests. These are fairly easily done, and that will give you a pretty clear example of how much to apply. Determining how much is coming from organic matter, the amount that's mineralized from the soil. Typically, you can figure 5 to 10% from organic matter that's being released if you've applied compost, manure, or a cover crop. That needs to be incorporated into the supply that you're adding from either water or from fertilizer. And so in the Ventura area, typical release rate is about 15 pounds of nitrogen per acre from any organic source that you apply. So, we have formulas that give us an estimate that is nitrogen that is coming from water. All growers should be doing some water testing at some point during the growth period, at least once a year, to get an estimate of the total amount of nitrogen that's applied through water. And the right time. So typically the greatest requirement of nitrogen is later on in crop development in annual crops, whereas in tree crops, it's more or less similar throughout the year. And there are peak periods early in the spring that kind of drop off. But the requirements for nitrogen in annual crops or perennial crops like citrus and avocado tend to be more or less standard throughout the year. The right time, we want to match the nitrogen delivery rate. One of the issues in coastal climate is we do have a type of winter when the trees are quiescent, when plant demand for nitrogen is lower. So our optimum application times for nitrogen are in the period of late spring through summer and into the early fall. And we just avoid it when soils are cold in winter, late spring or late fall. The right place. So if we're fertigating, we're putting nitrogen through our irrigation systems. That ideally, that is where the roots are. So that is applying the nutrient at the point where we're going to get optimum uptake by the plant. If we're broadcasting fertilizer, oftentimes we're applying nutrients where the roots are not. And so broadcasting is harder to get a high nutrient efficiency, application efficiency. So it's important to identify the rooting area and try and apply nutrients there. So applying water with our fertilizer, remember the rooting depths of a lot of these plants are fairly shallow. Avocados are about 12 inches, 0 to 8 inches. if we're putting our nutrients in with the water, we want to make sure that that water stays within the root zone. So, big, long, 24-hour, 48-hour irrigations usually are not advised if we're trying to get optimum uptake of not just water, but also of nutrients. So timing, ideally, we want to inject irrigation water, fertilizer into the irrigation near the middle part of the fertilizer irrigation run. And we want to run our system about a third of the time without the fertilizer, and then the middle third with the fertilizer, and then allow some time to flush the system. So here's an example of what happens when we apply some fertilizer with a short fertilizer injection. We tend to keep it in the root zone. If we apply it for a much longer period of time, we tend to get water and fertilizer moving below the root zone. There's no clear evidence that there's a difference in fertilizer, nitrogen that is fertilizer that's coming from organic versus synthetic sources. There's no indication that putting on more nitrogen than the tree or plant needs, you're going to get increased yields. As I was suggesting, when you're putting on more fertilizer than the plant needs, you tend to get a lot more vegetative growth than actual growth of fruit or flowers. Choice of materials, though, can have some effect on soil chemistry. In many cases, our fertilizers can have an effect on the pH of the soil. So using nitrate sources tends to increase pH versus ammonium sources tends to lower pH. So in summary, the highest nitrogen use efficiency is achieved by the best combination of right rate, right time, right place, and right source. And this requires an understanding of the dynamics of nitrogen in the soil, as well as the plant and the irrigation system.